the rain drummed against the cracked windows of the Desert Rose, motel like fingers tapping an impatient rhythm. It was 3 in the morning, and the neon sign outside flickered between pink and darkness, casting eerie shadows across the empty parking lot. Nicolas Cage sat in his rented Buick, engine off, staring at the modest 2-story building that would be his shelter for the night. He had been driving for 18 hours straight, fleeing from something he couldn't quite name. The movie premiere in Los Angeles had been a disaster. The critics had torn apart his latest film, calling his performance over the top and a caricature of himself. The words still burned in his chest like acid. At 60 years old, Nicolas had heard it all before, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the end of something. The motel's lobby door chimed weakly as he entered, dragging his single leather suitcase behind him. The carpet was worn thin, its original pattern long faded into abstract swirls of brown and orange. Behind the counter, a small television played an old black and white movie with the volume turned down low. Jimmy Stewart was on screen, talking to an angel. "It's a Wonderful Life," came a gentle voice from the shadows. Nicolas turned to see an elderly woman emerging from a back room, wiping her hands on a faded floral apron. She was perhaps 70, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun and kind eyes that seemed to hold decades of stories. "Excuse me?" Nicolas asked, momentarily confused. "The movie," she nodded toward the television. "It's a Wonderful Life. George Bailey's having the worst night of his existence, convinced he's worth more dead than alive." She studied Nicolas's face carefully. "Sometimes we all need an angel to show us what really matters." Nicolas felt an unexpected chill run down his spine. I need a room for the night." "Of course, dear. I'm Martha. My husband Earl and I run this place." She pulled out an old leather registry book, the kind hotels stopped using decades ago. "Will you be staying long?" "Just tonight, maybe 2 nights. I'm not sure yet." Martha's pen hovered over the page. "Running from something or running to something?" "In my experience, there's usually not much difference." Nicolas paused, struck by her directness. "Maybe a little of both. Room 237 is available. 2nd floor, corner room. Best view we have, though that's not saying much out here in the middle of nowhere." She handed him an actual metal key, not a plastic card. "Breakfast is served from 6 to 9 in the little dining area. Coffee's always fresh." As Nicolas climbed the narrow staircase, the old wood creaking under his feet, he heard the faint sound of a piano drifting through the walls. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a classical piece he recognized but couldn't name. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Room 237 was small but clean, with a double bed covered in a handmade quilt and a window that looked out over the desert. The piano music was clearer here, more distinct. Someone was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major with extraordinary skill and emotion. The notes seemed to fill the empty spaces in Nicolas's chest, the places where doubt and disappointment had taken root. He sat on the edge of the bed, still fully clothed, and listened. The musician played with the kind of passion that comes from years of practice and genuine love for the craft. Each note was perfectly placed, yet there was a rawness to it, an honesty that made Nicolas's eyes well up with unexpected tears. The music stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of rain and his own breathing. Nicolas kicked off his shoes and lay back on the quilt, staring at the water-stained ceiling. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the desert, lonely and mournful. He thought about his career, his choices, the bridges he'd burned in pursuit of artistic integrity. At what point had he become the person the critics mocked? When had his passion turned into parody? Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of empty theaters and silent audiences. He woke to the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from the dining area below. Sunlight streamed through the window, revealing a landscape that was both harsh and beautiful. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by distant mountains and the occasional Joshua tree. The dining area was a small room adjacent to the lobby with 4 round tables covered in checkered tablecloths. Martha stood behind a simple breakfast bar, arranging fresh muffins in a wicker basket. "Good morning," she called cheerfully. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected, thank you." Nicholas poured himself coffee from a thermos that had seen better days. "I heard someone playing piano last night. Beautiful music." Martha's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Oh, that was probably just the television." Sometimes the sound carries strangely in these old buildings. Nicholas knew she was lying, but he didn't press the issue. He selected a blueberry muffin and sat at the table nearest the window, watching the desert come alive in the morning light. A few minutes later, the lobby door chimed and a young woman entered. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing a simple blue dress and worn sneakers. She carried a bucket filled with cleaning supplies and fresh towels. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," she said softly. "Good morning, Lily. This is our guest, Mr. ... Martha looked toward Nicholas expectantly. "Cage, Nicholas Cage." Lily froze, the bucket nearly slipping from her hands. "The ... the actor?" "Yes." She stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes wide with surprise. I've seen your movies. My favorite was Leaving Las Vegas. The way you played Ben, it was like you understood something about loss that most people never see." Nicholas felt a familiar tightness in his chest. That role had nearly destroyed him, requiring him to dive so deep into addiction and despair that he'd almost drowned in it. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Lily seemed to realize she was staring and quickly looked away. "I should get to work." "Excuse me." She hurried toward the staircase, but Nicholas called out, "Wait, were you the one playing piano last night?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lily's cheeks flushed red, and she glanced nervously at Martha. "I know. No, I don't play piano." But her eyes told a different story. Nicholas had spent decades reading people, understanding the spaces between words and the truths hidden in gestures. Lily was the pianist, and she was lying about it. "My mistake," he said gently. The music was extraordinary, whoever was playing. Lily nodded quickly and disappeared up the stairs. Martha refilled Nicholas's coffee cup without being asked. "Lily's been working here for about 5 years now. Comes in every day, does her job, keeps to herself. She's had a hard life." "The piano?" "What piano?" Nicholas smiled. "Of course." He spent the morning exploring the small town that had grown up around the motel. It wasn't much. A gas station, a diner, a post office, and a few dozen houses scattered along dusty roads. The kind of place people pass through on their way to somewhere else, not the kind of place anyone chose to stay. At the general store, he struck up a conversation with the elderly proprietor, a man named Bob who seemed to know everyone's business. "Lily Thornton?" Bob stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. "Sad story, that one. Used to be a music teacher back in Phoenix. Had some kind of breakdown a few years ago. Lost her job, her apartment, everything. Ended up here working at the motel." "What kind of breakdown?" "Nobody knows for sure. She don't talk about it much. But I heard she was real talented, played in orchestras and such before." "Well, before whatever happened." That evening, Nicholas sat in the motel's small courtyard, a concrete patio with a few plastic chairs and an empty fountain. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. He could hear the piano again, the same beautiful, heartbreaking melody drifting from somewhere inside the building. This time, he followed the sound. It led him to a storage room behind the lobby, the door slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see Lily sitting at an old upright piano, her fingers dancing across the keys with incredible grace and precision. Her eyes were closed, her entire being absorbed in the music. She was playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically challenging pieces ever written. But it wasn't the technical skill that took Nicholas's breath away. It was the raw emotion pouring from her fingertips. Every note carried weight, carried pain, carried hope. This wasn't just music. This was a conversation with God. Nicolas stood transfixed in the hallway, afraid to move or breathe for fear of breaking the spell. He had witnessed many performances in his life, from Broadway stages to Hollywood sound stages, but he had never heard anything like this. Lily played as if her very soul depended on it, as if the piano was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. When the last notes faded into silence, Nicolas found his eyes wet with tears. "That was incredible," he said softly.
Lily spun around, panic written across her face. "I'm sorry."
"I know I'm not supposed to ... Mrs. Henderson lets me play sometimes after my shift, but I know guests aren't supposed to be disturbed ... You're not disturbing anyone." Nicolas stepped into the small room. "You're creating something beautiful." The piano was old, probably dating back to the 1960s. Its wood surface scarred and its ivory keys yellowed with age. But it was clearly well-maintained, tuned, and cared for. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. Lily's hands twisted nervously in her lap. "Since I was 5. My grandmother taught me." "You're extraordinary." "That was Rachmaninoff, wasn't it?" She nodded, surprised that he recognized the piece. Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor. I used to perform it with the Phoenix Symphony." The admission seemed to slip out before she could stop it. Her face immediately closed off, as if she regretted revealing so much. "What happened?" Nicolas asked gently. For a long moment, Lily didn't answer. She stared down at the piano keys, her fingers tracing silent melodies across their surface. "Performance anxiety," she finally whispered. "It started small, just butterflies before big concerts, but it got worse and worse until I couldn't perform at all. I'd get on stage and freeze completely. My heart would race, my hands would shake, I couldn't breathe. The last time I tried to perform professionally, I had a panic attack right in the middle of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. In front of 2,000 people, Nicolas felt his heart clench. He understood that particular kind of terror, the way self-doubt could poison something you loved until it became unbearable. "So you quit?" "I had to. I couldn't function. Lost my teaching job because I couldn't even play for my students anymore. Lost my apartment, my savings, everything." She looked up at him with eyes full of old pain. "I came here because it's the kind of place where nobody asks questions, where I could disappear. But you still play, only alone. Only where nobody can see or judge, or..." She gestured helplessly. "This old piano doesn't judge. It just lets me remember who I used to be." Nicolas sat down in a folding chair beside the piano bench. "Can I tell you something?" She nodded. "I've spent my entire career being told I'm too much. Too intense, too weird, too over the top. Critics love to tear apart my performances, to make me feel like everything I do is wrong. 3 days ago, a reviewer wrote that I'd become a parody of artistic ambition. I drove 18 hours straight to get here because I was running away from that." Lily listened intently, her defensive posture softening. "But sitting here, listening to you play, I remembered something I'd forgotten. It's not about the critics or the audience or anyone else. It's about the truth you put into your art. And your truth, Lily, is extraordinary. But I can't perform anymore. I can't share it with anyone. You just shared it with me." She considered this, her fingers absently playing a few bars of Mozart. "That's different. You're just one person, and you understand. Every audience is made up of individuals, people who understand loss and hope and beauty just like we do. You're not performing for critics or judges. You're performing for people who need to hear what you have to say. It's not that simple. No, it's not. But maybe we could start small?" Lily looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" Nicolas glanced around the small storage room. "What if you played for Martha and Earl? Just them. In the lobby, maybe tomorrow evening after dinner." The suggestion clearly terrified her. "I couldn't. I haven't played for anyone in 5 years. You just played for me. That was an accident." The best things usually are. Nicholas leaned forward. I have an idea. What if I read something while you play? We could do it together. That way, you're not alone on stage. What would you read? Nicholas thought for a moment. Poetry, maybe, or a short story. Something that would complement the music. Lily was quiet for a long time, her hands resting motionless on the keys. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. What if I freeze up again? Then we stop, and that's okay. But what if you don't? The next morning, Nicholas drove into town to the small library, a converted house with more heart than books. The librarian, a middle-aged woman named Carol, was delighted to help him find what he was looking for. Poetry and classical music? She led him to a small section near the back. How wonderful. We don't get many requests like that. Nicholas spent an hour browsing, finally selecting a collection of works by Rainer Maria Rilke, a poet whose words seemed to capture the same emotional depths that Lily's music explored. When he returned to the motel, he found Lily cleaning rooms on the second floor. She looked up nervously as he approached. I found something, he said, holding up the book. Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. There's a passage about artistic courage that I think pairs beautifully with classical music. Lily set down her cleaning supplies and took the book, reading the passage he had marked. The only journey is the one within, she read aloud. Don't be confused by the noise of the world. Exactly. What do you think? Could we try it tonight? She was quiet for so long that Nicholas began to think she would refuse. Finally, she nodded. Just Martha and Earl? Just Martha and Earl. That evening, after the motel's few guests had settled in for the night, Nicholas helped Lily move the old piano from the storage room into the lobby. It took both of them plus Earl to maneuver it through the narrow doorway, and by the time they finished, they were all laughing and out of breath. Martha had prepared tea and cookies, arranging them on a small table beside the piano. The lobby felt different with the piano in it, warmer, more alive, like a room that remembered its original purpose. This is exciting, Martha said, settling into a worn armchair. We haven't had live music here in years. Earl took a seat beside his wife, his weathered hands folded in his lap. What are you going to play for us, Lily? Lily's hands trembled as she sat down at the piano bench. I thought, maybe Debussy's Clair de Lune. It's one of my favorites. Beautiful choice, Nicholas said, taking his position beside the piano with Rilke's book in hand. I'll read between movements, if that's all right. Lily nodded, her face pale but determined. She placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes of Clair de Lune filled the small lobby like moonlight itself, soft and silvery and impossibly beautiful. Lily's technique was flawless, but more than that, her interpretation was deeply personal. She played the familiar melody as if she were discovering it for the first time, finding new colors and emotions in every phrase. Nicholas watched her face as she played, saw the moment when her fear transformed into pure artistic expression. Her eyes closed, her shoulders relaxed, and she became one with the music in a way that was almost magical to witness. When the piece reached its gentle conclusion, Nicholas opened the book and read, "The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens. And that is why the external future is so often a surprise, because we are not prepared for what is already within us." The words hung in the air, perfectly complementing the emotional landscape that Lily's music had created. Martha wiped away a tear, and Earl nodded approvingly. "That was extraordinary, dear," Martha said softly. "I haven't heard music like that since ever." "You have a gift," Earl added, "a real gift." Lily looked stunned, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "I did it. I actually did it." "You did more than that," Nicholas said. "You shared something beautiful with the world. How do you feel?" "Terrified, exhilarated, like I might throw up." She laughed shakily. "But also alive. For the first time in years, I feel alive." Over the next 3 days, word spread through the small town about the impromptu concert at the Desert Rose Motel. Bob from the general store stopped by to ask if it was true that they'd had a real performance in the lobby. Carol from the library wanted to know if they might consider doing it again. Nicholas extended his stay, officially citing car trouble, but really wanting to see what would happen next. He and Lily spent hours together, she playing while he read, experimenting with different combinations of music and literature. They discovered that Chopin's nocturnes paired beautifully with love poetry, that Bach's inventions seemed to dance with philosophical essays, that Rachmaninoff's passionate compositions created perfect backdrops for dramatic monologues. On Thursday evening, Martha approached them with a proposal. "What would you think about performing for a larger audience?" she asked. "Nothing fancy, just the folks from town who've been asking about it." Lily's face went white. "How many people?" "Maybe 20 or 30. We could set up chairs in the lobby, make it a real evening of culture." "I don't know if I'm ready for that many people," Lily said, her old anxiety creeping back into her voice. Nicholas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "What if we started even smaller? Maybe 5 or 6 people the first night, then gradually increase the size if you're comfortable? You'll stay? You'll keep doing this with me?" The question caught Nicholas off guard. He had planned to leave soon, to return to Los Angeles and face whatever consequences awaited him there. But looking at Lily's hopeful, frightened face, he realized he wasn't ready to abandon this unexpected collaboration. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I'll stay as long as you need me to." The first official performance was scheduled for the following Saturday night. Martha and Earl had invited 6 friends from town: Bob from the general store, Carol the librarian, the postmaster and his wife, and an elderly couple who ran the diner. Lily spent the week practicing obsessively, running through her repertoire until her fingers were sore. Nicholas worked on selecting readings that would create a cohesive emotional journey for the audience. On Saturday morning, Lily was a nervous wreck. "What if I mess up?" she asked, pacing around the lobby while Nicholas tuned the piano. "What if my hands shake? What if I forget the notes?" "Then you'll start over," Nicholas said calmly. "And if you can't start over, we'll do something else. The audience isn't here to judge you. They're here because they want to experience something beautiful. How can you be so calm? Don't you get nervous before performances?" Nicholas laughed. "Are you kidding? I've thrown up before more movie premieres than I care to count. But I learned something a long time ago. The nervousness never goes away completely. You just learn to use it as fuel instead of letting it paralyze you." That evening, as their small audience filed into the lobby, Nicholas could feel Lily's tension radiating from the piano bench. Her hands were visibly shaking as she adjusted the sheet music. "Look at them," he whispered to her. "Really look at them." Lily glanced up at the 6 faces arranged in folding chairs around the piano. Bob was wearing his best button-down shirt and had clearly combed his hair for the occasion. Carol held a small notebook, apparently planning to take notes. The elderly couple from the diner sat hand in hand, their weathered faces expectant and kind. "They're not critics," Nicholas continued softly. "They're not judges. They're just people who came here tonight because they believe in what you're doing. They're on your side." Lily took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. "Good evening," she said, her voice stronger than Nicholas had expected. "Thank you for coming tonight. We're going to share some music and poetry with you, and we hope you enjoy it." She began with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece Nicholas had heard on his first night at the motel. But tonight, it sounded different, more confident, more intentional. Lily played with the assurance of someone who remembered her own skill, who was reclaiming her artistic identity one note at a time. Between pieces, Nicholas read selections from various poets and writers, weaving together themes of resilience, beauty, and the courage to create. The audience listened with rapt attention, clearly moved by the unique combination of music and literature. As the evening progressed, Nicholas watched Lily transform. Her nervousness gradually gave way to the same transcendent state he had witnessed during their private sessions. She wasn't performing for the audience. She was sharing something essential about herself, something that could only be expressed through music. The final piece was Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a composition that starts gently but builds to thunderous, emotionally devastating heights. As Lily's fingers flew across the keys, Nicolas read from Rilke, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me." When the last notes faded into silence, the small audience erupted in heartfelt applause. Bob wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. Carol scribbled furiously in her notebook. The elderly couple stood and clapped as if they had just witnessed a performance at Carnegie Hall. "That was magnificent," Carol said, approaching the piano after the applause died down. "I've never experienced anything quite like it. The way the poetry and music spoke to each other, it was like hearing a conversation between your souls." Lily blushed, but Nicolas could see that the praise didn't terrify her the way it would have a week ago. She was beginning to remember what it felt like to connect with an audience, to share her gift without fear. Over the next few weeks, the performances grew larger and more elaborate. Word spread beyond the small town, and soon people were driving from neighboring communities to attend what locals had started calling the Desert Rose Sessions. Nicolas found himself extending his stay repeatedly, inventing new excuses to remain in this unlikely place that had become so important to both of them. He called his agent less frequently, ignored emails about potential projects, and allowed himself to exist entirely in the present moment for perhaps the first time in decades. The performances themselves evolved organically. Sometimes Lily played solo while Nicolas read. Other evenings, they would engage in spontaneous conversations with the audience about art, life, and the courage required to create. Occasionally, audience members would share their own stories or poems, turning the formal performance into something more like a community gathering. One evening in late October, a well-dressed woman in her 50s appeared in the audience. She introduced herself as Sarah Morrison, and she listened to the entire performance with the focused attention of a professional. After the show, she approached Lily and Nicolas with business cards. "I'm a talent agent from Phoenix," she said. "I represent classical musicians and performing artists. I heard about what you're doing here, and I had to see it for myself." Lily's face went pale. This is just ... "This is extraordinary," Sarah interrupted. "The combination of music and literature, the intimate setting, the emotional honesty, it's unlike anything I've seen in 20 years in this business. Have you considered taking this to larger venues?" Nicolas felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. The outside world was intruding on their small sanctuary, bringing with it all the complications and pressures they had been avoiding. "We hadn't really thought about it," he said carefully. "Well, you should. I have connections with venues throughout the Southwest, intimate theaters, art centers, music festivals. There's definitely a market for this kind of performance." She left her card and departed, leaving Lily and Nicolas alone in the suddenly quiet lobby. "What do you think?" Lily asked, turning the business card over in her hands. Nicolas looked around the small room that had become so precious to both of them. The worn carpet, the flickering television, the old piano that had witnessed Lily's rebirth as a performer. "I think," he said slowly, "that's a decision only you can make." That night, Nicolas lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the desert wind and distant trains. The conversation with the talent agent had forced him to confront a question he'd been avoiding. What happened next? He had been at the motel for almost 2 months now, the longest he'd stayed in one place in years. His agent had stopped calling. His business manager had started sending increasingly urgent emails about upcoming obligations. The real world was waiting for him, but for the first time in his career, Nicolas wasn't sure he wanted to return to it. The next morning, he found Lily sitting in the courtyard, watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of gold and pink. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. Nicolas settled into the plastic chair beside her. I keep thinking about what that agent said, about taking the show on the road, about all of it. The larger venues, the professional bookings, the ... success. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Are you afraid it would change things? Aren't you? She sighed, terrified. What if we take it to bigger stages and I freeze up again? What if the magic only works here, in this place where nobody expects anything from us? But what if it doesn't? What if you're ready for something bigger? What about you? What happens to Nicolas Cage, the movie star, if you spend your time doing poetry readings in small theaters? It was a question that got to the heart of Nicolas's dilemma. He had built his career on taking risks, on choosing unconventional projects and pushing artistic boundaries. But somewhere along the way, he had started playing it safe, accepting roles that paid well but didn't challenge him, avoiding the kind of vulnerability that real art required. Maybe, he said slowly, Nicolas Cage, the movie star, needs to remember what it feels like to be an artist first. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. They started small, booking 3 performances at intimate venues in Arizona and New Mexico. Sarah Morrison handled the logistics while Nicolas and Lily focused on crafting a program that would translate their desert magic to new environments. The first performance was at a converted church in Sedona, a venue that seated exactly 40 people. As they drove through the red rock formations on their way to the theater, Lily gripped the dashboard with white knuckles. What if they hate it? She asked. What if it doesn't work anywhere but the motel? Then we'll learn something, Nicolas replied, and we'll figure out what comes next. The Sedona audience was different from their regular crowd at the Desert Rose, more sophisticated, perhaps more critical. As Nicolas and Lily took the small stage, he could feel the weight of expectation in the room. But something magical happened as soon as Lily began to play. The intimate venue created an even more powerful connection between performers and audience, and the carefully curated program of music and literature wove together into something that was both familiar and entirely new. The audience was transfixed. When Lily played Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the same piece that had triggered her panic attack years earlier, Nicolas could see tears in the eyes of several listeners. But this time, Lily played it with complete confidence, transforming her old terror into artistic triumph. The performance was a resounding success, and afterward, audience members lingered to talk about how the experience had moved them. One elderly man told Lily that her music had reminded him of his late wife, who had been a pianist. A young woman thanked Nicolas for choosing poetry that had helped her understand her own struggles with anxiety. "We did it," Lily whispered to Nicolas as they packed up their materials. "We actually did it." "You did it," he corrected. "I was just along for the ride." The second and third performances were equally successful, and by the time they returned to the Desert Rose Motel, Sarah Morrison was fielding inquiries from venues across the country. But success brought new challenges. The intimate, spontaneous quality that had made their early performances so special became harder to maintain as the audiences grew larger and the venues more formal. Lily struggled with the pressure of meeting increased expectations, while Nicolas found himself missing the simplicity of their earliest collaborations. One evening, after a performance at a theater in Santa Fe that had felt particularly stiff and rehearsed, they sat in Nicolas's hotel room discussing their concerns. "It's different now," Lily said, curled up in an armchair with a cup of tea. "Not bad, just different. Sometimes I feel like we're trying to recreate something instead of creating something new." Nicolas nodded. The magic was never about the perfect performance. It was about the connection, the spontaneity, the feeling that anything could happen. So what do we do? Maybe we need to find a way to bring that spontaneity back, even in larger venues. Maybe we need to take bigger risks. They started experimenting with their format, incorporating more improvisation and audience interaction. Instead of sticking to predetermined programs, they began asking audiences to suggest themes or emotions they wanted to explore, then creating music and poetry combinations on the spot. It was terrifying and exhilarating, requiring both of them to trust their instincts completely. Sometimes it didn't work. Nicolas would choose a poem that didn't quite fit the mood Lily's music had created, or Lily would struggle to find the right piece to complement a particular reading. But when it did work, the results were extraordinary. Their reputation grew, and soon they were being invited to perform at major arts festivals and concert halls. The critics were divided. Some praised their innovative approach to combining literature and music, while others dismissed it as a gimmick. Nicolas found that he cared less and less about the reviews. For the first time in years, he was doing work that felt genuinely meaningful, work that connected with audiences on a deep emotional level. 6 months after their first official performance at the Desert Rose Motel, they were invited to appear at the Lincoln Center in New York City. It was the kind of venue that represented the pinnacle of artistic achievement, and also exactly the kind of formal, intimidating environment where Lily's old anxieties might resurface. Lincoln Center, she said, staring at the contract Sarah had sent them. I never imagined. When I was studying at conservatory, Lincoln Center was like the impossible dream. And now? Now it terrifies me and excites me in equal measure. Nicolas understood the feeling. Lincoln Center represented everything he had been running away from when he first arrived at the Desert Rose Motel. The pressure, the expectations, the sense that his entire career would be judged by a single performance. But it also represented an opportunity to share their unique artistic collaboration with one of the most sophisticated audiences in the world. What do you think? He asked. Lily was quiet for a long time, turning the contract over in her hands. Finally, she looked up at him with determination in her eyes. I think we have to do it, not because it's Lincoln Center, but because it's the next step in our journey. And because I'm not the same person who had a panic attack on stage 5 years ago. Are you sure? No, but I'm sure I want to try. The weeks leading up to the Lincoln Center performance were intense. They workshopped their program with smaller audiences, refining their approach and building their confidence. Nicolas worked with a vocal coach to improve his reading technique, while Lily spent hours each day at the piano, preparing for what would be the most important performance of her resurrected career. As the date approached, Nicolas found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had started as a chance encounter at a roadside motel had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated, a genuine artistic partnership that had transformed both of their lives. The night before the Lincoln Center performance, they sat together in Nicolas's hotel room, looking out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan. Are you nervous? Lily asked. Absolutely terrified, Nicolas admitted. You? Same, but also grateful. Whatever happens tomorrow, this whole experience has given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? The belief that my art matters, that what I have to say through music is worth sharing with the world. Nicolas felt a lump form in his throat. You've given me something too. What? The reminder that the best art comes from the most honest places. That it's not about being perfect or impressive, it's about being true. The Lincoln Center performance was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. The venue was packed with 2,500 people, including music critics from major publications and arts luminaries from across the country. As they took the stage, Nicolas felt the familiar surge of adrenaline and terror. But when he looked at Lily, seated at the grand piano with her hands poised over the keys, he saw not fear but complete focus. She began with a piece they had never performed in public before, her own composition, written during the weeks of preparation for this concert. The melody was haunting and personal, clearly drawn from her experiences of loss and recovery. As she played, Nicolas read from a poem he had discovered by Maya Angelou. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. The combination of Lily's original music and Angelou's powerful words created an electric atmosphere in the concert hall. The audience was utterly still, completely absorbed in the performance. Over the next 90 minutes, Nicolas and Lily took the Lincoln Center audience on an emotional journey that none of them would ever forget. They moved seamlessly between classical masterpieces and contemporary works, between love poetry and philosophical meditations, creating a tapestry of sound and language that spoke to the universal human experience. Lily's performance was nothing short of miraculous. Every piece she played was infused with the hard-won wisdom of someone who had faced her deepest fears and emerged stronger. When she performed Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same piece Nicolas had first heard her play in that cramped storage room, the audience was completely spellbound. Nicolas, too, had found his stride. His readings had evolved far beyond simple recitation. He had learned to use his voice as an instrument to find the rhythms and melodies hidden within the words. When he read Pablo Neruda's love sonnets over Lily's gentle accompaniment, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. But the moment that would be remembered long after the critics had filed their reviews came near the end of the performance. Lily had just finished playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major when a member of the audience, an elderly woman in the front row, raised her hand. "Excuse me," she called out softly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but could I share something?" Nicolas and Lily exchanged glances. This kind of spontaneous audience participation was exactly what they had been working toward, but it had never happened in such a formal venue. "Of course," Lily said, gesturing for the woman to stand. The woman rose slowly, leaning heavily on a walking stick. "My name is Ruth," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium. "I'm 92 years old, and I've been coming to performances at this hall for over 60 years. She paused, gathering her thoughts. "What you two have shared with us tonight, it reminds me why I fell in love with music in the first place. When I was a little girl, my mother used to read to me while my father played violin. They weren't professional musicians or poets, just people who understood that art could make life more beautiful." Ruth's voice grew stronger as she continued. "I lost both of them during the war, and for many years, I couldn't bear to listen to music because it reminded me too much of what I'd lost. But sitting here tonight, listening to you blend words and music with such love and respect, you've helped me remember that art isn't about loss. It's about connection. It's about the ways we touch each other's lives, even across time and distance." The audience was completely silent as Ruth sat back down. Nicolas felt tears streaming down his face, and when he looked at Lily, she was crying too. "Thank you, Ruth," Lily said softly. "That's exactly why we do this." They concluded the performance with a piece they had never attempted before, a completely improvised collaboration based on Ruth's story. Lily played a melody that seemed to capture both loss and hope, while Nicolas wove together fragments from various poets, creating a spontaneous tribute to the power of art to heal and connect. When the last notes faded into silence, the audience erupted in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. But Nicolas barely heard the applause. He was thinking about Ruth, about the Desert Rose Motel, about the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. The reviews the next morning were extraordinary. The New York Times called their performance a revelation and a completely new form of artistic expression. The Washington Post wrote that they had redefined what it means to create art in community with an audience. But the review that mattered most to Nicolas came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the Lincoln Center concert, he received a handwritten letter from Ruth, the elderly woman who had spoken from the audience. "Dear Nicolas and Lily," she had written in careful script, "I wanted you to know that your performance has stayed with me every day since that magical evening. More than that, it inspired me to begin writing again, something I hadn't done since I was a young woman. I've enclosed a poem I wrote about that night, and I hope it captures even a fraction of the beauty you shared with all of us." The poem, titled The Desert Rose Sessions, was a lyrical meditation on the ways that art can transform both creators and audiences. It was clear that Ruth was a talented writer, someone whose voice had been silenced by circumstances but not forgotten. Nicholas called Lily immediately to share the letter. "We have to find a way to include her in what we're doing," Lily said without hesitation. "Her story, her words, they're part of our story now." They began incorporating Ruth's poem into their performances, with Nicholas reading her words while Lily provided musical accompaniment. But more than that, Ruth's courage in speaking from the audience that night inspired them to make audience participation a central element of their shows. They developed a format they called the Community Canvas, where audience members were invited to share stories, poems, or musical pieces that connected to the evening's themes. Some performances became elaborate collaborative experiences, with multiple voices contributing to a single artistic experience. Their success continued to grow. They performed at venues across the country, from intimate coffee houses to major concert halls. They recorded an album that became a surprise bestseller, and they were featured on television programs and in major magazines. But the real measure of their success wasn't in reviews or sales figures. It was in the letters they received from audience members whose lives had been touched by their performances. Teachers who had been inspired to incorporate more creativity into their classrooms. Retired musicians who had taken up their instruments again after years of silence. Young people who had found the courage to pursue their artistic dreams despite the odds against them. One letter particularly moved them. It came from a teenage girl named Emily who had attended one of their performances in Denver. "Dear Mr. Cage and Miss Thornton," she wrote, "I came to your concert with my mom because she made me. I thought it would be boring. Just old music and poetry that didn't have anything to do with my life. But when you played that Chopin piece and read the poem about not letting fear stop you from creating, something clicked for me. I've been writing songs since I was 12, but I was too scared to share them with anyone. After hearing you perform, I decided to audition for my school's talent show. I didn't win, but I did something I never thought I could do. I shared my music with other people. Thank you for showing me that art is about courage, not perfection." As their second year of touring came to an end, Nicholas and Lily found themselves back at the Desert Rose Motel, the place where their collaboration had begun. Martha and Earl welcomed them like returning family, and the old piano was waiting in the lobby exactly where they had left it. That evening, they performed for their original audience, Bob from the general store, Carol the librarian, and the handful of locals who had supported them from the very beginning. It was a homecoming in the truest sense, a return to the simple joy of making art in community with people who cared about them. After the performance, as they sat in the courtyard under a canopy of desert stars, Lily posed a question that had been on both of their minds. "What's next for us?" Nicholas had been thinking about that question for months. Their touring schedule had become increasingly demanding, and while the performances were fulfilling, he found himself missing the spontaneity and intimacy of their early collaborations. "I've been thinking about something," he said slowly. "What if we created a place where other artists could have the kind of experience we had here? A retreat center, maybe, where musicians and writers and other creative people could come to work together and discover new forms of collaboration." Lily's eyes lit up. "Like a residency program?" "Exactly. We could buy some land, build studios and performance spaces, create a community dedicated to artistic exploration and risk-taking. Where would we do something like that?" Nicholas looked around at the desert landscape that had become so precious to both of them. "Why not here? This place already has the magic. We'd just be sharing it with more people." The idea took root and grew quickly. Within 6 months, they had purchased a large tract of desert land about 20 miles from the motel and had begun construction on what they called the Desert Rose Art Center. The main building would house performance spaces, recording studios, and artist residencies. There would be walking trails through the desert, meditation gardens, and outdoor amphitheaters where artists could perform under the stars. The project attracted support from unexpected sources. Ruth, the elderly woman from the Lincoln Center performance, made a substantial donation in memory of her parents. Sarah Morrison helped them navigate the legal and financial complexities of establishing a nonprofit organization. Even Martha and Earl contributed, offering to help with hospitality and meals for visiting artists. But the most meaningful support came from the artists themselves. Musicians, writers, poets, dancers, and visual artists from around the world applied for residencies at the center. They were drawn by the promise of collaboration, of the kind of artistic cross-pollination that had given birth to Nicolas and Lily's unique performance style. The center opened its doors on the second anniversary of Nicolas's first night at the Desert Rose Motel. The inaugural program featured 12 artists from different disciplines, all committed to exploring new forms of creative collaboration. Nicolas stood on the main stage of the new performance hall, looking out at an audience that included their supporters, local community members, and the first group of resident artists. Lily sat at a beautiful new grand piano, her hands poised over the keys. 2 years ago, Nicolas began, I was a man running away from his own life. I ended up at a roadside motel in the middle of the desert, convinced that my best days were behind me. What I found instead was a reminder that the most important journeys are the ones that lead us back to who we're supposed to be. He gestured toward Lily. I found a partner whose courage in the face of her fears inspired me to confront my own. Together, we discovered that art isn't about individual achievement. It's about connection, community, and the willingness to be vulnerable in service of something larger than ourselves. Lily began to play, and Nicolas continued. Tonight, we inaugurate a place dedicated to that kind of artistic exploration, a place where musicians and writers, dancers and painters can come together to discover what happens when different forms of creativity collide and combine. The inaugural performance featured collaborations between all 12 resident artists. A jazz saxophonist improvised over a contemporary dancers movement. A poet's words were set to music by a folk singer and a classical cellist. A painter created art in real time while responding to musical and literary prompts from the other artists. It was chaotic and beautiful, experimental and deeply moving. Some collaborations worked brilliantly, others fell flat, but all of them embodied the spirit of creative risk-taking that the center was designed to foster. As the evening wound down, Nicolas and Lily performed together one final time. They chose the same pieces they had played on their very first night at the Desert: Rose Motel, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, and a reading from Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. But the words that had seemed so relevant 2 years ago carried new meaning now. Don't be confused by the noise of the world. Look within yourself and recognize what calls to you. That is your true voice, your authentic path. As the last notes faded into the desert night, Nicolas reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had begun as a famous actor fleeing from his own success and criticism, searching for something he couldn't even name. What he had found was far more valuable than any movie role or critical acclaim. He had found his authentic voice as an artist and human being. Lily had traveled even further, from the paralysis of performance anxiety to the joy of artistic collaboration. She had not only reclaimed her gift as a musician, but had discovered new ways to share that gift with the world. But perhaps most importantly, they had both learned that the greatest art comes not from individual genius, but from the connections we make with others. Every performance, every collaboration, every moment of shared creativity had been strengthened by the presence of others, audiences, fellow artists, and the larger community that supports and sustains all artistic endeavors. As the audience began to disperse, many lingering to talk with the artists and explore the new facilities, Nicolas and Lily found themselves alone on the stage for a moment. No regrets? Lily asked, gesturing toward the beautiful space they had created. Only one, Nicolas replied. What's that? That it took me 60 years to figure out what I was supposed to be doing with my life. Lily laughed. Better late than never. What about you? Any regrets? She considered the question seriously. I used to regret the years I lost to fear, the performances I missed, the music I kept inside. But sitting here now, I realize that everything I went through, the anxiety, the breakdown, even the years of cleaning hotel rooms, it all led to this. To us, to this place, to the work we're doing now. So no regrets? No regrets. Only gratitude. 6 months later, the Desert Rose Art Center had a waiting list of artists hoping to participate in its residency programs. The collaborations emerging from the center were being featured in concerts and exhibitions around the world. Most importantly, the center was fostering exactly the kind of creative community that Nicolas and Lily had envisioned, a place where artists from different disciplines could come together to explore the frontiers of collaborative creativity. Nicolas continued to accept occasional film roles, but only projects that aligned with his newfound commitment to meaningful artistic expression. He found that his experience at the center had made him a better actor, more willing to take risks and more connected to the emotional truth of his characters. Lily had begun composing again, writing music specifically designed for collaboration with other art forms. Her compositions were being performed by orchestras and chamber groups around the country, and she had been commissioned to write a piece for the New York Philharmonic. But their most important work remained their performances together. They continued to tour, though more selectively now, choosing venues and audiences that aligned with their commitment to intimate, participatory artistic experiences. On a cool evening in November, almost 3 years after Nicholas's first night at the Desert Rose Motel, they found themselves back in that original lobby. Martha and Earl had decided to retire, and they had asked Nicolas and Lily to perform one final concert in the space where their collaboration had begun. The lobby was packed with friends and supporters, everyone who had been part of their journey in some way. Ruth had flown in from New York despite her advanced age. Bob and Carol sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Sarah Morrison was there, along with several of the artists who had participated in residencies at the center. As Nicolas and Lily took their places beside the old piano, the same instrument on which Lily had first rediscovered her courage, Nicolas felt a deep sense of completion. Not the completion that comes with ending, but the satisfaction of having found his true calling. 3 years ago, he began, I was a lost man who stumbled into this lobby by accident. What I found here wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a community that showed me what it means to create art in service of others. He looked around the room at all the faces that had become so precious to him. Every person in this room has contributed to the journey that brought Lily and me to where we are today. You've been our audience, our supporters, our collaborators, and most importantly, our friends. Lily placed her hands on the familiar keys of the old piano. Tonight, we want to share something new with you, a piece I've been working on that tries to capture everything this place and all of you have given us. She began to play a composition unlike anything she had written before. It started softly, with a simple melody that seemed to contain echoes of all the classical pieces she had performed over the years. But as the music developed, it became something entirely original. A musical autobiography that told the story of fear overcome, community discovered, and artistic purpose found. As she played, Nicolas read from a poem he had written specifically for this evening. In the desert, we learn that miracles don't announce themselves with trumpets and fanfare. They whisper in the wind, shine in the morning light on red rock, emerge from the kindness of strangers who become friends. We come to the desert running from something. Failure, fear, the weight of expectations we can no longer carry. We stay because we discover something we didn't know we were looking for. Community. Purpose, the voice we thought we had lost. The desert teaches patience. It shows us that beauty emerges not from rushing toward a destination, but from paying attention to the journey itself. Every cactus flower, every sunset, every conversation with a stranger contains the seeds of transformation. Tonight, in this place where two lost artists found each other and found themselves, we celebrate not what we've achieved, but what we've learned. That the greatest art comes from the courage to be vulnerable, that the most meaningful success is measured not in applause but in lives touched, that we are never truly alone as long as we remain open to the connections that surround us. This desert, this motel, this community, they saved us, not by giving us what we thought we wanted, but by showing us who we were meant to be. For that gift, we will be forever grateful. When the music and words came to an end, the small audience sat in reverent silence for a long moment. Then, spontaneously, they began to applaud, not the polite applause of a formal concert, but the heartfelt appreciation of a community celebrating its own. As people began to mingle and share memories, Nicolas found himself standing alone with Martha near the lobby's front window. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what, dear?" "For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. For giving Lily a place to heal. For showing us both what community really means." Martha patted his arm gently. "All we did was provide the space. You two did the rest." The space was everything. Sometimes that's all people need, a place where they're safe enough to become who they're supposed to be. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Nicolas and Lily remained in the lobby with the old piano, reluctant to leave the place that had given them so much. "What are you thinking about?" Lily asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about all the people who will never know how close they came to giving up on something important. All the artists who are sitting in their own version of that rented car outside, convinced their best days are behind them." "What do you think we can do about that?" Nicolas smiled. "We keep doing what we're doing. We keep creating spaces where people can rediscover their voices. We keep showing up, keep taking risks, keep believing that art can change lives. Even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard." They sat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the ghosts of all the performances, conversations, and moments of connection that had taken place in this small room. The Desert Rose Motel would soon be sold to new owners, but its legacy would continue in the Arts Center, in the collaborations it had inspired, and in the lives it had touched. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the desert sky, Nicolas and Lily gathered their things and prepared to leave. But before they walked out the door, they turned back for one final look at the lobby that had changed everything. The old piano sat silent in the corner, waiting for new hands to bring it to life. The worn carpet showed the paths of countless travelers who had stopped here on their journeys to somewhere else. The faded photographs on the walls held the memories of decades of small human dramas and triumphs. "Thank you," Lily whispered to the room itself. As they stepped out into the cool morning air, Nicolas felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with endings and everything to do with understanding. He had come to the desert running away from his life, but he was leaving with a clearer sense of purpose than he'd ever possessed. The sun was rising now, painting the landscape in shades of gold and rose. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal and patient, witness to countless stories of transformation and renewal. The desert had taught them its most important lesson, that sometimes you have to lose your way completely before you can find your true path. As they drove away from the Desert Rose Motel for the final time, Nicolas and Lily carried with them not just memories but a mission. They would continue to create spaces where art and community intersected, where strangers could become collaborators, where the courage to be vulnerable could transform both creators and audiences. The desert grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but its lessons would stay with them forever. In a world that often felt disconnected and hurried, they had discovered the power of slowing down, paying attention, and opening themselves to unexpected encounters. Their story had begun with a breakdown, Nicolas fleeing from criticism, Lily paralyzed by fear. But it had become something much more beautiful, a testament to the healing power of art, community, and human connection. They had learned that the most meaningful journeys aren't measured in miles or destinations, but in the depth of the relationships we forge along the way. As the Desert Rose Arts Center continued to grow and evolve, touching the lives of artists from around the world, Nicholas and Lily knew that their work was far from finished. There would be new collaborations to explore, new communities to build, new artists to inspire and be inspired by. But they would always carry with them the memory of that first night in the desert, when a broken-down actor and a frightened pianist discovered that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the courage to begin again. The road stretched ahead of them, leading toward new adventures and unknown destinations. But they were no longer running away from something. They were traveling toward a future filled with possibility, purpose, and the endless potential for human connection through art. Behind them, the desert bloomed in the morning light, patient and eternal, waiting to offer its gifts of transformation to the next travelers who would find their way to its healing embrace. The end. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, and share your own experiences of unexpected encounters that changed your life in the comments below. Sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin when we least expect them, in the most unlikely places, with the most unexpected people. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the desert, where two lost souls found not just each other, but themselves.